19,000 years ago, what is now just harsh, totally barren desert
All right,
was actually...
let's jump right into this. Welcome to This Explainer, where we're going to challenge just about everything you think you know about ancient Egypt. When we picture this immortal civilization, our minds instantly go to a few really iconic images, right? But what if I told you that the story we all know is barely even scratching the surface? Today, we're stripping away all those old cliches to uncover the true, completely wild 4,000-year history of a civilization that was defined by an endless, dramatic cycle of rise, catastrophic collapse, and spectacular rebirth.
I mean, just picture that classic postcard image in your head right now. A traveler riding a camel right past the Great Pyramid of Giza. It perfectly captures the vibe of ancient Egypt, doesn't it? Well, actually, it's completely misleading. There were absolutely no camels in Egypt when the pyramids were being built 4,500 years ago. No way, right? But that one simple fact immediately proves how this instantly recognizable civilization is, all too often, completely misunderstood by us today.
So to truly grasp this history, here is our roadmap for today. First up, we've got Forged by the Nile. Number 2 is the Age of Pyramids. Then we'll head into Part 3, Dark Ages and Rebirth. Part 4 covers the Golden Empire. And finally, number 5, we'll wrap up with Conquered by Culture.
Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1. Forged by the Nile, from nomadic hunters to a unified nation-state. Because you see, this whole story starts with a massive, dramatic climate shift.
To understand just how incredibly deep this history goes, we have to rewind a bit. 19,000 years ago, what is now just harsh, totally barren desert was actually a green, fertile savanna. Nomadic people lived out there, hunting wild cattle, even carving their images into the Korda cliffs. But then, about 10,000 years ago, a tiny little tilt in the Earth's axis shifted the global climate. The range just dried up. This massive desertification forced all those scattered tribes to migrate toward their only remaining lifeline, which was the incredibly fertile Nile River. Fast forward to about 5,000 years ago, and the populations there had settled and grown so much that King Narmer was actually able to unite Upper and Lower Egypt, literally creating the world's first nation-state.
Now, running an entire nation-state obviously requires some serious organization. You might think of hieroglyphs and instantly imagine mystical poetry or magic spells, but their origin is surprisingly boring, actually. The world's earliest known writing system wasn't developed for grand, sweeping romance. It was literally a bureaucratic tool. It started around 3250 BC as tiny little bone and ivory tags just to calculate taxes on oil, linen, and grain. So the very foundation of this highly mystical culture was actually built on strict, relentless administration.
Which leads us perfectly right into Section 2, the Age of Pyramids, engineering the afterlife. This is where total, absolute belief in a god-king's afterlife produced the greatest monuments on Earth.
Honestly, this entire era can be summed up by one staggering number, 2.3 million. That is the number of individual, massive stone blocks used just to build the Great Pyramid of Giza. It was the tallest structure in the world for over 3,800 years. Setting 2.3 million blocks required a highly coordinated, relentless effort from an estimated 20,000 people over the course of 2 decades. And you know, this completely shatters a really popular myth. You've probably heard that the pyramids were built by slaves, right? Well, the archaeological evidence tells us a completely different story. These workers were housed in a massive, purpose-built, planned city. They were incredibly well-fed. We're talking consuming 74 cattle and hundreds of sheep and goats every single week. Plus, they received comprehensive, state-sponsored medical care and slept in specialized barracks. So, scratch the slave theory. These were highly organized, highly valued government workers. It was just this massive, well-oiled machine of human cooperation.
But, of course, we have to ask, what happens when that well-oiled machine breaks down? That brings us to Section 3, Dark Ages and Rebirth, Chaos, Warlords, and Civil War.
The shift is incredibly jarring. Usually, traditional Egyptian art shows this idealized world, abundance of fruit, meat, perfect crops, all guaranteed by the divine pharaoh. But then, on King Yunus's causeway, you find this incredibly rare, haunting depiction of gritty reality. Emaciated, starving famine victims literally collapsing. The climate had shifted again, you see. The Nile floods failed, and the pharaoh was completely powerless to stop it. The whole belief system just fractured. With the central authority totally gone, society basically collapsed. Local warlords, like this massive egomaniac named Ankhtafi, stepped right into the power vacuum and literally declared themselves equals to the gods. Egypt fractured into rival warring factions in the north and south. It got so brutal that northern troops committed the ultimate blasphemy. They sacked the sacred city of Abydos and actually burned the ancient mummies of the very first pharaohs. It eventually took a ruthless southern warlord named Monte-Hotep II, backed by an army whose battle-scarred bodies we can still examine today, to violently reunite the nation.
But a reunited Egypt pretty quickly faced a brand new threat, foreign occupation by a group called the Hyksos. So how did the Egyptians fight back? They adapted. They literally reverse-engineered their invaders' advanced military tech. Take the composite bow, for example. It wasn't just a simple curved piece of wood. It was a multi-layered weapon of mass destruction. It had a wood core for the main structure, cow horn glued inside the curve for a powerful spring, animal sinew layered on the outside for extreme tensile strength, and finally birch bark to protect all those fragile glues from the elements. By adopting tech like this, along with the horse and chariot, the Egyptians pushed out their occupiers and transformed into a hardened military superpower.
And that military resurgence brings us right into Section 4, the Golden Empire, Wealth, Heresy, and Scandal. Welcome to the New Kingdom.
Now, before the Egyptians completely pushed those Hyksos invaders out, tensions were, as you'd guess, incredibly high. Listen to this diplomatic message the Hyksos king, Apophis, sent from his base in the north down to the Egyptian leaders in the south. Expel the hippopotami. They do not allow me to sleep day or night because their noise is in my ear. Keep in mind, these guys lived hundreds of miles apart. It was a hilariously insulting, highly deliberate provocation, probably mocking the Egyptian leaders' wives, honestly, and it literally sparked the furious, successful Theban uprising to reclaim their entire country.
Once they got Egypt back, the New Kingdom ushered in this incredible golden age of massive statues and just unimaginable wealth. But it also brought some really profound religious chaos. Pharaoh Akhenaten briefly outlawed all the traditional gods so he could worship a single sun disk, which threw the whole country into a panic. When he died, the furious priests desperately wanted to erase his heresy from memory. Which brings us to a fascinating question. Whose face is actually on King Tutankhamun's world-famous golden mask?
The forensic evidence for this is wild, and it's hidden right in plain sight. First, the mask features pierced ears, which is super unusual for an adult male pharaoh like Tutankhamun. Beyond that, the face itself is crafted from a completely different type of gold than the rest of the headdress, and there are visible soldering marks proving the face was just grafted on later. The staggering conclusion? The priests were doing a massive spiritual decluttering. They literally took a mask belonging to either the female ruler Nefertiti or maybe the heretic Akhenaten himself, slapped King Tut's face right over it, and buried it to erase that scandalous chapter of history forever. That kind of deep, internal corruption, prioritizing wealth and politics over true belief, eventually rotted the empire from the inside out. Let's move to our final act, Section 5, Conquered by Culture, the Final Irony.
Because here lies the ultimate irony of ancient Egyptian history. As the empire weakened, you see these waves of foreign invaders, the Libyans, the Kushites, the Greeks, and yes, they absolutely conquered Egypt physically. But culturally, it was a totally different story. The Libyans started wearing Egyptian crowns. The Kushites began burying themselves in pyramids. Even when Alexander the Great and the Greeks took over, they literally crowned themselves as traditional pharaohs and adopted the ancient Egyptian gods. Even when Egypt totally lost its military and political independence, its culture was just so intoxicating, so deeply rooted that it completely seduced the people who conquered it.
Even the famous Greek historian Herodotus traveled down to Egypt and was completely stunned by what he found. He wrote that the Egyptians exactly reversed the common practice of mankind. He was just marveling that the women were the ones out trading in the markets while the men stayed home to weave. It perfectly highlights how, even in its twilight years under foreign rule, Egyptian societal structure remained profoundly distinct, incredibly resilient, and utterly fascinating to the rest of the ancient world.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. How does a civilization that collapses into dark ages, gets completely torn apart by civil war, and is physically conquered over and over again, ultimately manage to conquer the minds of the very people who subjugated it? The true immortality of ancient Egypt isn't just found in its giant stone pyramids or heavy golden masks. It's found in an irresistible culture that quite simply refused to die. I really hope this explainer sparked your curiosity today and maybe leaves you eager to go out and uncover even more of these incredible ancient secrets for yourself.